Welcome, every. You know what? The recording started. It doesn't even matter. It doesn't matter. So, welcome back to Big Boy Sports. I know it's been a long week since we last had a little discussion, but it's okay. It's okay. Unfortunately, this week there was only about 4 indoor arena football games to talk about. So, you had up some other news too, but we'll get into that next Tuesday. This Tuesday, however, that is today, we're going to talk some lacrosse because I was a little bit late on this. So, might as well, get something out this week. And because there's a lot of things that does need to be talked about here. And I do have some opinions on some certain things. And let's just start with the first elephant in the room, and that is the National Lacrosse League. Right now, the draft is going to be in September. I heard it was going to be like September the 13th or something like that. So, it's not going to be streamed or anything. Who really cares? It's the draft. I don't really particularly care for drafts, nor do I care for all-star games, but, we're going to talk about the PLL anyway. But that's not right now. We're going to talk about that next. But there are a couple things that have kind of turned this offseason kind of weird. Obviously, a lot of guys are in Canada, or playing the PLL. In the off season, and what we're getting here from the CBA, the players and the league, is that can things be resolved before December? The CBA expired, and now it's time to negotiate. And if the players and the league don't agree on anything, we're going to have a delayed start to the NLL season, and that's just gonna. We're gonna at least be looking at maybe January for the start of the NLL season. If things do not go the way they're supposed to go. Now, I completely forgot that that the CBA was not like it had expired and stuff like that. I had been paying attention like that. Last time we talked about the NLL, the Buffalo Bandits were hoisting up another championship trophy. That's what was happening, and honestly, if there is a way, to where the NLL, isn't playing at least in December, starting in January, because the last time, players, said we're not going to be playing unless certain things are agreed to, there was a delay in the season. And that was like a couple of years ago. That was like, I don't know, like 4 or 5 years ago when there was a delay at the start of the season. The other big issue is the Pagulas. They said, nah, we don't want Rochester no more. So the Rochester Nighthawks, what is going to happen to this team? Could somebody local, step up? Do they move somewhere? I've heard Montreal. Toronto's not an option, guys. I'm sorry. You know how expensive Toronto is. It's just not an option. Like, Toronto finally was able to go back to Hamilton, but Toronto isn't an option. The greater Toronto area is not an option here. Montreal's like the only one I've really heard. Maybe Edmonton, some place that I've also heard, as far as like rumors go. Does this team fold? And then we go down again, another team, because remember, Panther City was lost last year, or rather this past season. And, we were down 14 teams. And then we go down to 13 teams. Because that'd be pretty crazy. And if Rochester were to fold, like nobody steps up, it's going to be wild. Because, something has to give. It's July. It's July again. Yeah, the CBA could, be, like, well, I don't know, it could be, on hold and on negotiation still all the way up until the beginning of the season. But, like, the Rochester thing is a big, big deal. If the Nighthawks are not playing next year, that's going to hurt a lot. It's going to hurt a lot, for the brand of the NLL, because it already lost Panther City. Which, again, Fort Worth, Texas, just that was not a place to put a team. I'm just going to be real with you, but it is what it is. It happened. I'm glad I went to a game. So I can say, hey, I went to a game and I watched, some of the best, light it up, on the floor in a fantastic game that I went to in Fort Worth a couple years ago. But Rochester, if they fold or if they move somewhere, that doesn't create the sense of realism, that this is the next major league. To me, it just doesn't scream that. Just what the NLL has been touting for quite some time. Yeah, the TSN deal is still there. I'm not sure about the ESPN deal. I think it's been renewed. It should be renewed? Question mark. I don't know. Probably. ESPN's got to have some kind of filler late nights on Saturdays. After college basketball, and stuff like that. But I don't know. But anyway, if the NLL, is like, we're gonna have, this, that, and this, I'm just like, it is what it is at this point. Like, what can we even do? We just have to hope that things get a lot better, as far as like negotiations, as far as the CBA is concerned, and as far as Rochester is concerned. There's a lot of things going down for the NLL, but the trajectory can go up, if you get what I mean. So, on to the PLL. So the standings right now, are kind of in flux because everybody's either 3-2 or 2-3. Balanced league. What can you say? I mean, this is probably one of the best years of the Premier Lacrosse League so far. And I got to tell you, I'm liking that. I'm really liking that. The All-Star game was intriguing. Brendan O'Neill won the All-Star game MVP. Graham Hosick, one of the fastest shots, I think, that has ever been recorded, 123 miles per hour on the fastest shot competition. Again, I don't like All-Star games, but hey, it happened. The WLL All-Star game happened too. It was fun. It was interesting. Everything was nice, clean, consistent, and concise. And, again, the playoffs, are 5 weeks away, 5 weeks and some change. Second half of the season starts this weekend, with some Friday night lacrosse and then Saturday, of course, with more games. It's going to be an intriguing weekend, out in Chicago, street lacrosse. That thing is returning. Yes, I know. I don't really care for that. But, hey, it's a thing that gets people out, and about, throwback weekend with throwback uniforms. The throwback uniforms look exquisite. Even though the only two teams are legacy teams, I mean, the throwback uniforms, I've liked the throwback mesh uniforms. They just always look good, if you get what I mean. So, yeah. The other big thing for the PLL is that, hey, 5-year deal with ESPN. Games will, again, still be on ESPN2, ESPN, or ABC. The WLL will also have games on, ESPN platforms in addition to ESPN Plus. And ESPN said, all right, we got y'all. We're going to have a little equity stake in the league. We're going to have a little bit of ownership and stuff like that. We're going to help y'all out a little bit because I feel like the synergy between the PLL and ESPN has been there for quite some time. The whole duration of this first part of the deal has been there. And now, ESPN's like, all right, we got y'all 5 years, cheap programming. We don't have to do too much, we can still put a lot of games, behind the paywall and everything like that, which I'm not entirely mad at anymore. Because there's so many games, that are on ABC now. I'm not even mad anymore. I'm not even mad at the fact that everything's all streaming anymore. I'm just not, because there's a game each week on an ESPN platform. And usually, ABC's got you, pretty much every week when ESPN decides to use ABC for live sports anyway. And, there's talks and there's, stipulations that ESPN and the PLL wants, Rabble's been like, all right, well, we're going to try and grow the 12 teams in the future and everything like that, home cities, which, I don't think it's viable to have, more than – I don't think it's really viable to have more than, the whole tour-based model right now. I just don't see it. I just don't see the markets, being kind enough. There are some that are very, very kind. San Diego, is going to be one of them. Ohio Stadium in Columbus, one of those stadiums. But Long Island, absolutely not. Absolutely not. Homewood Field, absolutely not. People in Maryland are kind of, I've heard, some stuff about people being kind of high to lacrosse, after a certain point, after Johns Hopkins is done with the regular season. That's just how Johns Hopkins fans are. Absolutely annoying, but that's neither here nor there. And I think some of these other places, can work a little bit better for the PLL. Albany's always been, great, for the PLL and everything like that. For like, a place like Chicago is interesting. Again, Ohio Stadium. San Diego. Basically, what I'm trying to say is the PLL has to, maybe continue to pick and choose some places. Please come to Frisco next year, or somewhere in Dallas. Somewhere in Dallas. I'm begging. As long as it's not the Star, I'll go to the Star, but I don't want to, go to the Star. I just want the PLL to come back to Dallas next year, please. I'm begging and pleading, man. I'm begging and pleading. I'll even take the All-Star game. Kansas City, that was a great turnout for all the All-Star game festivities and everything like that. But, the real meat and potatoes here to kind of end this off today is what kind of season are we going to get for the PLL moving forward? Are we going to continue to have a season where, we have June, July, August, and a little bit of September, even though it should be a little bit of September, it should be Labor Day. I've been championing the entire time that the PLL should end on Labor Day, at least Labor Day Sunday, because, again, ESPN doesn't utilize ABC the way they should. At least that's my opinion anyway. But I'm not going to argue with a multi-billion-dollar company. But ending the season during the NFL season is not all right. In a couple of years, the Olympics, more world lacrosse shenanigans are going to be happening. In the Olympics as well. It's going to force some shifts in the schedule. For the next couple of years anyway. So this year was like perfect. This was a perfect year to have the season in the Labor Day, But instead, we had to have the championship on, September the 14th. It could have been August 31st, but I guarantee you when I look at ESPN's advanced schedules and I go to ABC, I've been looking for weeks now to see that August schedule. I've been looking for weeks. And I guarantee you, ain't nothing going to be there. Ain't nothing going to be there after a certain point, on Sunday the 31st, I guarantee you. But again, I'm not a scheduler. I wish I could do something like that, but I'm not. But again, the apex of what I'm trying to say is does the PLL move some games to midweek? I would like to see something like that. I would like to see a championship on Labor Day. But the other alternative, which is one that may ruffle some feathers because, it gets into NLL playing time. It was already a problem. When guys were choosing between, going up north to Canada to play, in amateur, the senior leagues for the Man Cup and stuff like that versus going to PLL. It was already a problem. The problem now is that, hey, could things, be like, hey, we do a spring to late season again? Do we do that again? And it's like, I don't know if I really want the MLL structure back, but I can take it as long as there's still games of the week each and every week, on the ESPN platform. At least one game a week on the ESPN platform, I will take it. I will take it. But as long as we end the season before Labor Day, or at least on Labor Day, which is what should have been the goal of the entire time, But my fix is that maybe we try to expand the season maybe a little bit, maybe do double round robin, midweek games, have like some, what happened to the whole, people, in the college circles were clamoring about ACC Thursday night lacrosse from back in the day. Well, not back in the day. It was only like a couple years ago. But you get what I mean. You get what I mean. So, I don't know. The greatest solution. My suggestion is still end the season on Labor Day. Go from Memorial Day to Labor Day. Don't overlap too much with the college season and everything like that. I mean, cool. You can overlap the college season if you want to start in the spring. Like April, maybe earlier in May. We could start earlier in May, like the last couple weeks of May. I don't know. Somebody tell me something, and then have like the players that, are supposed to be drafted, wait another year and stuff like that. I don't know, man. It's kind of hard. It's kind of not an easy solution. So I don't have, the greatest solution to everything because I'm just one person. And, the lacrosse community, is going bonkers over beyond me. I mean, who really cares? It's sponsorship. It's money going to PLL at the end of the day. Like, who cares about all that? What I care about is these players getting the pay that they deserve, the play that they deserve, which is the highest level play. That's all that kind of matters to me. We get the best lacrosse, in the world, because come on, let's keep it real. But what do you guys think? I'm going to come back with This Week in Indoor Football next Tuesday. This Tuesday just was not feeling it. I was like, you know what? We need to talk some lacrosse anyway. So that's why I decided to do this today and get my thoughts on some things. So until next Tuesday, I'm out and I'll see you later.